looks at how they view themselves relative to their peers, how they view themselves in school, their behavior, their popularity, and just their level of comfort at school. Are they relaxed at school? Things like that. Resilience is, and of course, mood, of course, I always want to look at mood, you know. Is there some depressive features? Is there some kind of anxious presentation going on? Is this a child that's ruminating a lot during the school day? Worried about this or that? I have kids that I'm worried mom's gonna die. Okay, all right. Well, let's talk about that. Let's figure out. Let's figure out why you're scared of that. You know, kids have all kinds of fears. You know, and if you look at the age range, you know, 6 years old, there's certain fears kids have. 8 years old, 10 years old. You know, as they get older, then the list gets smaller and smaller. 8-year-olds, they're going to be scared of the dark. You know, a lot of them are still, and there's nothing pathological about that. It's a normal thing. But now if a child's scared mom's going to die and they don't want to start going to school, or you know they're worried that they're in class and they're crying because they're worried mom's not going to come live long enough to come and pick them up, now you have a problem. So you always want to look at mood, and I think depression is, we're pretty good as a society, believe it or not, I think at identifying that, although some people still have resistance to the whole idea of depression, but it's real, it's there. It's not real hard to diagnose. I think it's one of the easier things to diagnose. Anxiety, though, I think is underdiagnosed, especially in kids. So I think we just need to always be aware that kids could be depressed, but they could also be anxious as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a disorder either. I mean, but I work with a certain number of school phobias, kids that are they're fighting to get them into school. They're kicking and screaming. And so anxiety can get to the point where it's just overwhelming. And some kids have fears of things that's just really strong. Over the years, I've seen a number of cases now, emetophobia. It's just the fear that you'll vomit in public. And I've seen, gosh, in 2 or 3 years, I had 4 or 5 cases of emetophobia that came out of nowhere. I had never seen in 19 years, back then would have been 14 or 15 years in practice, almost seen no kids that ever had emetophobia. Then all of a sudden, I get this cluster of kids. They're all scared of going to school because they're worried about vomiting or worried that someone else will vomit in public. And I'm telling you, I was surprised at the level of anxiety. I mean, it was off the chart for a few of these kids. So anxiety, okay, we don't want to diagnose something that's not there. But at the same time, and some anxiety is normal for kids. I mean, we all need a little anxiety. You know, I don't want to be late tomorrow. I'm anxious. Tonight when I go to bed, a little anxiety is good. It's going to get you up in the morning, get you to do what you're supposed to do the next day. But if it becomes paralyzing, then that's the point where you've got to look more closely. Resilience is the other thing I look at. Resilience is how well can I roll with the punches that life is going to bring. Because has anyone ever had any punches here in life? Yeah, if anyone's saying no, I know you're not telling the truth. Because that's how life works. You're gonna get punched around pretty good sometimes. Kids do too. The things they're worried about, not the things we're worried about. Nonetheless, they're certainly as real as the things we worry about. And sometimes their reaction far outweighs our reaction, maybe even worse stimuli out there. So I like to look at resilience. How well related is a child to their peers? How do they deal with their own frustration and anger and being upset? How do they solve problems? Mastery, that's called mastery. And so I have an inventory that kind of looks at that. Just how well do they roll with the punches in life? You know, basically. Okay, moving on here. Problem solving, reasoning, higher order thinking skills. You always want to look at, once kids get learning and knowledge in there, what do they do with it? What do they do with it? Can they reason about it? I have kids that get information in really well, but they can't really, they do this. They don't quite make the connection sometimes. You know, I have other kids, they have a lot of trouble getting information, and they are trouble reading and trouble with this and that, and man, they can. But the concepts they have, they get it. They can reason about it. They can tell you all the. They can more integration of the things that you're learning and the things that you know about how to apply them to the world and how to apply them to learning. So I always give a number of different executive functioning tasks and problem solving tasks. Study skills is something I always want to look at as well. Most kids are deficient in study skills, that's a fact. I've had tons of kids in high school, they take the study skills class. No. It's like, we got to go back to study skills 101. Well, I'm going to cram for the test. I'll just stay up till 1 o'clock or 2 tonight. And well, all right, let's go back to study skills 101. That's, sometimes it's time management problems that are all part of that as well, why they don't have good study skills. Test taking anxiety is something else I like to look at. Two of the main phobias in the United States are public speaking and math. Isn't that interesting? Public speaking, yeah, it makes sense. Most people don't want to speak in front of people. I know when I was younger, I didn't want to. I was terrified of it. And then after a while, you just say, what do you got to lose? Let it let it fly. So you want to look at anxiety. Math is the big one, but I mean any test-taking anxiety, I have an inventory I use that looks at that. And then finally, metacognition is something that it's just a child's ability to kind of direct their learning and learn. Metacognition has been called learning to learn. Kind of the idea of, okay, I was going along, I was understanding what I was reading, and now I'm stuck. And the metacognition is a little bulb that goes on in your head, and it says, you're stuck. And then it starts to answer, why am I stuck? The light should go brighter, like, oh, there's 3 words here, I don't even know what they mean. So now I can go back and look those words up, Or the teacher didn't go over this. My notes, all this, we went over this. We didn't go over. See, it's when a tree, you're driving along, when a tree comes in the road, why is that tree in the road, and how am I going to get around it? That's what metacognition is. It's a self-directed kind of learning. It's a bulb that goes on again and says, wait a minute, something's wrong. I was doing fine. I understood all these math problems. I know how to do this. What is different now? Am I not focused? Am I tired? Is there some principle in this math problem that was not in the previous ones I did? Do I have a gap in my knowledge here somewhere? Or do I simply need to just go take a 5-minute break and come back and I'll be fine? But the tools that you choose makes a difference in terms of how much time you waste. I see a lot of kids, they waste time. They use the same tool over and over. Well, I'm going to cut this board with a screwdriver, It's like, no, you're not going to cut that board with a screwdriver, You can cut it with a hammer, but it's going to take a long time. It's going to be a mess when you're done. So when I teach kids metacognition, I have a saying, the right tool for the job. You have to pick the right tool first. First you have to know there's a problem, then you have to get your toolbox out, and then you have to pick the right tool for the problem. You're not going to use a screwdriver to cut a board, right? You're not going to use a hammer to screw a nail, or to screw in rather. You have to use the right tool for the right job. Vocabulary you want to look at, receptive and expressive. Receptive is simply the things you're hearing from other people. So I'll look at vocabulary in terms of, okay, these are the words the child knows. Hopefully they're going to be commensurate with their grade level and their capabilities. And then expressive is more, their speech, how well they present and explain things to others. So I'll look at expressive vocabulary too. If you see kids that say that thing, or you know what it's called, or they misname things, that's called dysnomia. So they call it, it's close but no cigar. That's not quite those are notable errors. Those can be retrieval errors, but those can be storage errors as well in long-term auditory verbal memory. And certainly certain learning disorders like ADHD, but especially dyslexia, you'll find where there's some of these errors in terms of how kids name things, where their naming abilities will be way below average. Kids in the autism spectrum often use unusual ways of talking about things. And so they have these very unique ways, they're idiosyncratic ways of kind of naming things, talking about things, and it varies depending on the youngster, but you can see that definitely with autism as well, where or kids in the spectrum, a lot of times expressively, they just have a lot of trouble getting their thoughts out. You know, there's kind of a disfluency to how they talk and try to get ideas out. And so that's why they come back, what you'll often find is they just come back to what's familiar. They'll come back to whatever their theme is or whatever they know at the moment, rather than there's real reciprocity. You know, you're communicating back and forth. Kids in the spectrum will simplify their expression and their thinking by going back to what's familiar to them. They really will. And partially it's partially the way their brain works, trouble shifting, but also it's just a safer way for them to communicate, you know. So even the young kids that I see sometimes, and they're doing the cartoon, what I call cartoon talk, and they're talking, you know, they're going through their spiel, they're saying something meaningful, they're trying to tell me something, and they're using someone else's communication to do it. In a sense, it's, you know, they're taking a splice out of this over here, and they're saying, this is what I'm trying to communicate to you. And so if you have to look carefully, and a lot of times, unfortunately, you don't know what cartoon or what movie some of these youngsters are taking things from, but especially young kids, they're trying to express their feelings, or they're trying to express a circumstance in their life by using. So I don't think it's totally random. I know there's some people that think it's random. I don't think it is. I don't know of any research on that, but I've seen it where it's like, this youngster's saying something. I mean, they're trying to tell me something. They're not using their own words to do it. Again, it's kind of they're borrowing a situation and communication from a different context, and they're trying to use in the present context to get something across. Really, when you think about it, it's functional. It's just that we don't know though what they're talking about in terms of the context that they're referring to. So we don't have any, you know, we can guess, but so we have to help kids like that first start to label. Okay, this is cartoon talk, you know, but people talk is different than cartoon talk, you know, and that's where social scripting and things like that, you start to teach kids in the spectrum, this is what, you know, it's throwing a ball back and forth, communication, and I throw a ball. When I work with kids on that, we throw a ball back and forth. No, don't throw it. I'm not done answering. You keep it, you know. Then when you throw it to me, now you can talk. But for, you know, and so it's just teaching them wait. You know, there's impulse control. You gotta wait. I know you have something you want to say, but you've gotta wait. Okay. Finally, the central executive functioning is frontal lobe. So I like to give a number of measures in neuropsych testing to look at what's called central executive functioning, which is more a frontal lobe kinds of functioning, and there's a number of tests out there. A lot of disorders have frontal lobe issues. ADHD definitely does. A lot of learning disabilities do. Autism spectrum definitely does. So does bipolar disorder, though. So does OCD. So does Tourette's. So frontality is really important for a lot of these disorders that we identify, you know, under the psychoeducational or neuropsychological or psychiatric or however you want to classify it. There's these elements that are frontally based, and again, there's overlap between them, which makes it more complicated from a diagnostic perspective. Then finally, I look at subprocessing. Subprocessing is simply, you know, okay, this little girl has trouble writing, but why does she have trouble writing? Is it on the working memory side? Is it on the fine motor side? Is it grammatical? Is it, is it fun to knowledge and ideas? Just, there's a gap there. Same thing with, reading comprehension. Is it because fluency and word recognition and decoding and phonemic awareness are all problematic? Not necessarily. There's something called specific reading comprehension disorder where fluency, decoding, everything's stellar. They look great. Can't comprehend. When it comes time to look at details, look at chronology, look at inferences, look at predictions, there's a huge deficit there. They've really only identified this disorder about 2 years ago with some of the the neurocognitive research, and it's called specific reading comprehension disorder. It's different than dyslexia. Dyslexia, comprehension's higher and the fluency and all that's lower. It's the other way around with the specific reading comprehension disorder where, again, the fluency and all that is great, but the comprehension's low. Kids with autism spectrum works the other way too, the other way as well. Decoding usually is exceptional. Spelling often excellent. But then when you get to the comprehension at some point, and it can be as early as second or third grade even, where you start to see the comprehension doesn't match up. Okay? By the way, that's called hyperlexia. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that term. High-functioning autistic kids, well demonstrated that some of them have hyperlexia. And that's what I just described. It's great decoding, the ability for orthography and spelling and phonemic awareness, all that. They can read well and it sounds great. They can sound out complicated words, but then when you go to ask them what they read and what the meaning of it is, that's when you have these deficits that you're like, how does that fit? That they're such a great reader, yet they don't have the capability to comprehend and to tell you details about the story. So that's basically what I've got today. A number of checklists I'll go through as well. You can kind of look through some of the things that I included there. Obviously, I want to look at developmental delays too. I want to get medical history, neurological history. You always want to look at history of head injury, seizures, high fevers, fainting, headaches, toe walking, tremors, things like that. Family history, always important, both from a genetic standpoint and from just family dynamics, looking at the dynamics of the family. I also look at the parent's learning style and the child's learning style. So often I find moms come in highly verbal, very, boys that are highly visual. And I'm like, okay, Mom, we got to talk, all right? You're articulate, and you got a lot of strengths going, but your son or even your daughter sometimes, your communication style is much different. So I work with families that try to, Dad, you're visual. Your daughter or your son, they're very auditory verbal. They need, and you're not. You just, give commands and, you're a visual guy. You just expect them to know what they're supposed to do, and they need more extensive instructions to be able to comprehend. So that's another issue I work with, is just kind of helping to get the learning style of the parents and the learning style of the child on the same page. And then finally, dietary, I think is underappreciated maybe, but I think many more parents are getting very good at this. I have some parents that come in and they're spot on with the whole dietary stuff. They get that what their kids eat and what they drink is important. You just have to be careful about putting all your eggs in that basket, though. Does that make sense? You just have to be careful, because I have parents that have tried all these different therapies and stuff, and invariably I say, well, did it help? Well, we think it might have helped a little. When you think it might have helped a little, that's another way of saying it probably didn't help. If something has efficacy, you're going to say it helped. helped a little, or, mild or moderate amount or extreme amount, but there should be some efficacy there that you can observe in your kids. So the dietary stuff, again, I don't know of any diets, for example. There's ketogenic diets for seizures, for example. There's demonstrated efficacy for those. Is there a demonstrated diet for ADHD that necessarily works? I haven't seen any good research on it. I mean, I know there's certain things some parents avoid with their kids and it helps, but how do we know that's not a child that has a food allergy and ADHD? And they're overlapping circles there. I've never seen a diet that for ADHD works perfectly, yet there's some general principles with diet that definitely can be helpful. So again, include that as a piece in your interventions, but it's not, again, don't put all your eggs in that basket. I think I've seen parents, a lot of parents actually over here that have spent a lot of time on that, and it has, again, the efficacy for what they put into it, it just didn't pan out the way they thought it would. So dietary changes have to be made slowly and they have to be maintained over time. It really starts with how you shop in a grocery store. That's how it's got to start, and you have to do it over long periods of time. I mean, if you're doing dietary changes, and I hear families all the time, well, we tried it, but it was miserable for all of us. Well, okay, that's like saying, well, I have to exercise for 60 minutes each day. You won't do it. Most of us won't. I mean, that's a fact. We won't. So you have to start with something that's manageable first with dietary changes, and then you can go from there. Okay, that's pretty much what I've got today on neuropsych testing. I'll hang out for a while after here, if anyone wants to talk, and be happy to talk with you. And does everyone have this about Pat Howie's conference coming up here? This is going to be, I think this is going to be really good. I would encourage everyone to go to this. I'm going expecting to learn a whole lot. I just signed up last night, so if you get a chance, please come to that.